All right, how are we going with the sound for our Zoom folks? All right, I'll keep going. All right, so moving on to the solutions for those problems. Firstly, give them more time, however little we might have. For the resources, make it cheap, use our existing resources, try our best to reduce tutor hours and hire as few people as possible. And finally, making it optional so that you've got the students who think that this is something that's valuable versus those who don't, and they can choose themselves and they don't feel any pressure to attend or that they're missing out in some way. So going on to the activities themselves, what we actually did, I wrote these two exercises, one about pipetting, simple moving liquids from one place to another, and the other spectrophotometry, using a really commonly used lab equipment, which uses light to analyze chemical properties. And what we did was in week one, we realized, hey, we've got some lab space, some lab time. Can we open this up? And we opened up 6 sessions, morning and afternoon, Tuesday to Thursday, just 2 hours each. Hired 2 tutors for each of those sessions, and I was in there as well, sort of to introduce the session. And the idea was that the students would come in, grab one of these self-directed learning exercises, either go off to a station, work on it themselves without talking to anyone else, or if they had any questions, ask peers, or also go to tutors or myself and just ask. And so it was just relaxed environment, something that they could pick and choose how much or how little they wanted to engage with that. So the goals for that was that the exercises would be accessible in their language and design, straightforward, easy to understand, and clear in their formatting. And the instructions would be clear so that a student could just go off and do that themselves without having to interact with anyone if they didn't want to. And finally, to have achievable outcomes so that at the end of the 2 hours, the students would know, hey, I've learned something. I feel better about the coursework. I feel better about my skills here. Lost control again, sorry. That's all good. There we go. Okay. So I'll just show you a bit of this one pipetting exercise, the flagship exercise, and we'll run through it. We don't have to read every detail, but I'll just point out some of the key features. So firstly, on the first page was the background information. So accuracy, precision, why is pipetting important, and what are our aims with accurate and precise pipetting. And then over the page, we have sort of some pictures of the different volumes of pipettes that they would be working with. And down there, sort of what do the numbers on a pipette mean? So you'll notice that I've got some of these yellow boxes down there, and that's something that they have to actively do. In this case, have a go at figuring out the volumes on the pipette. If it says 040 on a P100 pipette, a bit technical, but it's all good. And straight away, they've got their answers flipped upside down just on the underside of that, just like an old school magazine style or newspaper where you can just figure out your answer straight away so they could quickly get that knowledge and be happy and move on. And over the page, we have the actual tasks themselves. So on this left page, basically get to know the pipette. What are each of the components of it? How do you hold it? And what do you do with a pipette tip? Things like that. And once again, in the yellow boxes, highlighting the tasks that they had to do while the background is in the white. Same across the page where they just get a lot of different practice pipetting, basically. So really simple stuff. All they just need is a little bit more time. And finally, for the last thing they had to do is a self-assessment task. So this is, they would go up to a station, pipette water onto a balance and weigh it to see actually what volume were they pipetting, and then sort of assessing themselves on how well they did accuracy and precision wise. So that way they could actually pull out a goal and be able to see their progress from before they started till after. Just lost control again, please. And we also had some little practice gel stations for them to load into the gels, but those weren't listed on the tasks, just kind of bonus, hey, you want to come and try it out. So there's a little bit more of a relaxed feel to it. Now, let's talk about the reception. So in 2023, we had 86 students, and in this year, 103 students. And this is in cohorts of 500 to 600 students in our courses. So I was quite happy to touch that number with these activities. Now, disclaimer, we've had a double selection bias here. Firstly, it's optional sessions, so the students who came in were the ones who wanted to come. And secondly, the 30 who answered the survey of that number were the ones who cared enough to answer the survey. So obviously this data is a little skewed in the positive, but I'm gonna take it anyway. So 100% of the students agreed or strongly agreed that the session was helpful and would recommend it to others. And I think I'm really happy with that, because it just shows the ones who valued the time, it really made a difference to them. And we'll look at the spread of their confidence in the use of the pipettes. So I asked them if they were confident before versus after doing the activities. And we got that strongly disagree, moving into the agree and strongly agree side. So they were very happy with how they progressed, even in that short 2 hours. And most students found the instructions clear. Of course, reading the short answer feedback, some of them said, oh, that bit might have been nicer to say this way or something like that. But of course, we've got a language barrier, technical language barrier. So with a bit more revision in the language, hopefully we can get that there. But thankfully, we had the tutors and myself in the room to clarify some of that, and some of the comments reflected that. And just the next slide, please. And my favorite comments. We'll go through a few of them. I left feeling confident in my abilities. It was really helpful to introduce us if we hadn't used the equipment before. It helped ease some of my anxiety. I think I latched onto that one because I think for some of our students with student access plans, things like this can be very helpful to them. And they were able to be in the lab prior to lab pracs, no pressure to perform, and get experience with the tools in their own time. So I think I found these very valuable because they showed that for the students who really worried about their practical lab component, this could make a big difference to their learning experience. Just 2 hours, and they feel so much better for the rest of the 6 practical sessions that they've got for the rest of the semester. One particular comment I liked was, I looked very smart in my first lab session, which I think was good because they got in and they were already hitting the ground running. So my takeaway points that I'm hoping to sort of spark in everyone here is to look at what is a current deficiency in your teaching sphere of influence. So something that is little, but kind of a bit annoying, that potentially we could use a small achievable way to improve that. So we're always talking about improving authenticity, accessibility, and availability of the learning resources. So if we can do some small things like this, that could improve that. And finally, what resources we've got to achieve this. So, I mean, we hired 2 tutors for 2 hours for 6 sessions. That's a bit of $1,000 something, I think. And I worked it out to be about $2 per enrolled student in terms of costing. So of course, that's budget issues aside, but it can be done quite cheaply. And so going over the goals again, I hope I've managed to share these exercises with you well, encourage you to think about ways that we can implement similar activities in our spheres, and hopefully to connect and collaborate. So as I said, this was all inspired by other people's work in sort of similar areas, but quite different as well. And so that kind of sparked this idea. So keen to talk more about sharing the resources I've got, or if you have ideas, that kind of thing. I won't claim to be an expert. This is my pilot, but I just wanted to share it with everyone. Right, thanks. So if you've got any questions or you want to get in contact, that's over there, and the Padlet is there as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ryan. We have a few minutes for question. Who has a question? Oh, here, Bradley, first. Your hand was up first.
Thank you, Brian. I've got 2 questions. The first one is, did you collect any data of these particular students with relation to their end of semester performance?
No, that's not something I've managed to follow. I think the issue is that we don't assess practical skills, which is potentially a little difficult. We could look at their marks, actually. We do know who attended, and Yeah, sorry. Yes, the survey was anonymous, actually, now that I think about it. But in terms of outcomes for labs, maybe if we did start assessing their lab component a little bit more, that might be good, and it might get them to pay attention a little bit more as well. But yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you.
My second one was more of a comment, but did you encourage peer tutoring during the proper lab sessions from those students who now have learnt the pipetting skills to those students who had not learnt the skills?
Yeah, so
Because
at
that's
the
something
end,
that would ease the tutors, ease the requirement on tutors, because now you've got 100 people who know what they're doing.
yep. Yeah, so at the end of each of the self-directed sessions, I said to the students, okay, now you can go and teach your lab partners when you go into there, of course, just an encouragement, nothing official. But also I think there are still some students who think that they've got it all under control and go in there and do everything, and then their partners might be a bit diminished, so to speak. And also with that many students, we need the tutors to catch the lowest common denominators. So they still teach them, show them the pipetting at least. Yeah.
Great. Anybody else? Louise?
Thanks, Brian. That was really interesting. And apologies if I missed this, but I was just wondering, of the students who were invited to come along, was that given out to all students in SCMB, regardless of the year that and experience level they were at?
Yeah. So they were invited from genetics and cell biology and biochemistry. It was easier to lock this pilot to the courses themselves, just for logistical purposes in terms of the survey, the sign-on, etc. It would be nice. So my final goal with this is to have a self-directed learning facility, full stop. But I mean, that is in the future. But so this was kind of just starting it up. Potentially we could expand it to our second and third years and make it a bit more available, but that would require more resources. So potentially with this pilot, I can go and say, hey, can we have a lab skills days, in week 1 where anyone in our school can come and learn? That would be great.
Yeah. So they were first years, is that
Second
right?
years.
Oh, second years,
Yeah.
sorry.
Although
so-
nowadays we have a lot of first years doing second year
Doing second
courses
year,
anyway,
that's
so
yeah.
we
So what-
caught some.
What I was wondering is, did you get a feel for whether most students were coming in having not had experience before, and so they wanted to prepare before their classes, or were they students who had been in the lab before, but they wanted to upskill and get better?
Most of the ones who were coming in had either not touched the pipette or not touched the spectrophotometer, and they wanted that basic knowledge. Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
One more at the front here. Lots of questions for you.
Oh, I think
Hi, just a quick logistical question. Did you require pre-registration, like people saying, yeah, I'm going to come at this time, and then they came at that time? So it wasn't just, these are the times that you can come and they could turn up, or?
Yeah, so we did have a sign-on system, 30 students per session. Of course, the pain being some students who sign on didn't turn up, and if students weren't able to sign on, they might not have turned up. So they might not have gone, hey, is there space? So that was the pain of making it optional, because then some students who want it might miss out, and some would sign on early and then not come. But that's another thing to iron out.
Did you find any sessions just had nobody there, or, were they mostly kind of foolish? Or?
Yeah, at least half to full. In the first year, there was some where I go, oh, what? Only 8 people turned up. But this year was better. Yeah, sure.
They were scheduled when that was access to students as the hard part, right? But if we that big secondary course and back or hit them up with lots of back how beneficial so these option sessions were in the same timetable slot as the labs that we covered. So their timetable. Yeah, so their timetable should be empty in that slot. So we're trying to enable or reduce as many barriers as possible to turning up. And yeah, we did the sign up sheets, and you get the usual one or two go, oh, I signed up for Thursday. I didn't mean to sign up for Thursday. Can I sign up for Wednesday? Yeah, I can fix that. No worries. But we had to consider numbers. We couldn't have all 500 turn up because that would have, well, Brian would have had a meltdown had that happened, I think.
Yep, would have
Trying
died.
to service that many students. But we didn't have any, I didn't see any complaints about, oh my gosh, I wanted to come, but the sessions were full. So.
For context, that was Justin Ridge, one of the course coordinators who was so supportive of the program. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. A comment and a question. I don't think we should let medical students dictate what we're trying to teach biomedical students, and I really rail against that. I think we should have competency-based teaching for these skills, and so well done. My question is, reading and sort of imagining how you use something is different to a still picture. Have you considered putting videos? Because in labs, we often have a video for how to use a centrifuge properly. I reckon it'd be a real nice add-on to that, right?
So one of the resources that we shared were Jack Wang's videos on pipetting. I'm not sure if he had one for spectrophotometers, but he has made a series of skill videos, which we also did show them. Well, we gave them links to. Whether or not they actually watched it is another thing, but we do have these resources available as well for that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Please join me in thanking Brian one more time. And we will hand over to Lisa, and I'll see if I can get this to work. There it goes. There you go, Lisa. Just the top button. Yes, and if it doesn't work, just say next slide and I'll go drive. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for your patience with me.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Lisa Ackerson. I'm a teaching-focused academic in the School of Biomedical Sciences, and it's really nice to see a bunch of my colleagues here. Thanks for coming along. So I mainly co-course coordinate and teach into two big third-year courses. So I'm going to talk about one of those today as a case study. So I've got the session goals there, but I've actually got quite a bit I want to cover. So these slides will be on the Padlet, so you can have a look at those, but let's just get straight into it. So recording of face-to-face lectures in higher education is really quite an expectation of students nowadays, particularly post-COVID. And usually these lecture recordings are available on something like Blackboard. And the proposed benefits for students is that, and also I guess for the university, is that it allows us to have larger student numbers than what could potentially be accommodated in our lecture theatres. So we can have some students that don't have to come in to the face-to-face classes. It can help to alleviate timetable clashes in these really large courses. And of course, the big one that we always talk about is this greater flexibility for the students to be able to access the lecture material when they might be working or doing some other things as well as their study. It also provides the students with an opportunity to review concepts. So even if they did go along to the face-to-face lecture afterwards, they can then have a look at the lecture recording. And it also provides that option for students to pause the lecture recording or increase the speed of the recording so they can really tailor it to the stage they're at with their learning as well. But the impacts on academic performance are a little bit unclear. So in some studies, they've shown that by augmenting their in-person attendance, it can be helpful to have the recordings. But where students are relying on the recordings alone, this can be detrimental, and particularly because it's really hard for them to maintain their motivation and their self-efficacy to actually keep up to date with the lectures. So the context of this case study is a third-year biomedical science course. It's a pretty big course, so we usually have around 150 to 230 students, and there are 3 one-hour lectures each week, and all of these lectures are recorded. It's quite a content-heavy course, so we have roughly around 30 lectures each year is covered in the end-of-semester exam, and this is presented by between 7 and 9 lecturers across 3 different content modules. So the course has a lot of variety, not just in the content, but also in the way it's delivered, because we've got a lot of different lecturers. There's also a practical component with some associated assessments, but the main assessment is the end-of-semester exam, and that's a hurdle in this course. So the problem we saw over many years, and this was before even COVID had hit, was we were getting dwindling attendance at our face-to-face lectures. And this is actually one of my colleagues, Professor Brian Key, who this semester, for the first time since he started teaching, he's been teaching for 34 years, had to deliver his lecture to an empty room. So luckily this has not happened to any of us yet in our course, but many of us have been lecturing to numbers like maybe half a dozen, or I think the worst I had was 6 students in the class. So students are obviously relying on the lecture recordings, but we also suspected that students might be relying even more on just the slide handouts and not even watching the recordings. So our course, as I said, it has a reputation even amongst the students for having a high content load and having a very hard exam. And we saw that in comments in the Pre-Med Society guide. I don't know if any of you have seen that for courses, but they will often comment about that for our course. But we still also get really positive comments about our course. So we still have high CCATs, very positive feedback from students, and we still maintain high enrolments. So we don't think that this dwindling attendance is because they're not engaged with the content or enjoying the content. So we wanted to ask ourselves, are the students actually viewing the recordings, and what is the impact on their academic performance? And I was going to get you guys to discuss just briefly at your table for maybe a minute of whether you think this is true in your teaching context. But I noticed some of my colleagues here, it's probably not applicable to you guys, but maybe on Zoom, if you want to put a few comments in the chat, you could also put something on Padlet just to say, yes, this is happening in my context as well. So in 2022, we decided to have a first peek at their viewing behaviour. So we downloaded the Echo 360 analytics at the end of semester, and this was a bit of a quick and dirty look. So I just looked to see were each student watching the lectures, yes or no, and just looked at the end of the semester. So again, in this year, very few of the students were coming in person to the lectures, aside from the very first lecture. And so looking at the analytics is pretty reflective of the majority of the students in the course. And actually, if you can remember back in that year, we had a COVID outbreak. We also had the Brisbane floods. So out of the 34 lectures that were covered in the end of semester exam, actually 9 of these were only available as recordings online. And so this graph here just shows along the bottom the overall exam grade. So you can see the ones that failed getting that grade of 1 to 3, the ones in the middle with a 4 or 5. It was actually only 2 students who got a 4. So most of the students in that group did get a 5, and the ones that got the 6 or 7. And on the y-axis there, we've got the number of videos that they watched. So you can see we've got a pretty clear correlation there, or relationship between watching the videos and doing well in that final exam. But what's interesting is when you actually start to look at the data within each of those columns of the individual students, we've got some pretty interesting things potentially happening here. So we have these students here who are watching a lot of the videos, but still doing really bad on the exam. So what's going on there? Are they cramming at the end of the semester, so it's just really not being helpful for them learning the material? Or were they just not viewing very much of the actual recording? So remember, at this point, we're just looking, was it a yes or no? At the end of semester. And then we also have this little cluster of students who did very well, but don't appear to be watching many of the videos. So we're suspecting these are the ones that were actually there face-to-face in the lecture. Last year in 2023, we decided to do a bit more of a detailed analysis of their viewing behaviour. So rather than just looking at the analytics at the end of the semester, I actually downloaded the viewing data every week throughout the semester. Again, last year we had very few that were coming in person to the lectures, aside from in the first week. And actually at the very first lecture, my colleague Wally, who's here, and I got up and showed them the data from 2022 to show them how important it was for them to engage with the lectures and how that could impact on their end of semester exam. I tracked the viewing analytics for all 33 lectures. There were 33 lectures that year that was covered in the end of semester exam. And this was actually done over 16 weeks. So it was not just over the 1 to 13 weeks of semester, but I also included during SWAT-FAC, as well as just before the end of semester exam and the deferred exam as well. So this time, rather than looking at a simple yes or no, I counted when each lecture had been viewed by a student, And here I defined a viewing as they had to have watched at least 50% of the recording. So it was a little bit different to last time. And then what I did is I randomly selected 100 students from this cohort and plotted their viewing data to have a look at what they might be doing. And we actually were able to classify their viewing behaviours into 4 different categories. So in the first category, we didn't actually have to plot these because these were the non-viewers. So these students were watching less than a third of the recordings throughout the semester. And so 16% of students fell into this category. And I think there were about 4 or 5 students that watched absolutely no lectures at all. So this behaviour we called the crammer. So here on the graph, I've just shown sort of representative plots for 6 students, but we actually had 26% of the students were doing this, so about a quarter of the students. So you can see along the x-axis, we've got the week there. So we've got all through the semester, plus the purple arrow at the end shows when the end of semester exam was. Other purple, lighter purple arrow in the middle shows when the mid-semester break was. So we counted their watching during the mid-semester break at week 7. So the crammers were watching them greater than 50% of the lectures very late in semester. So they were only really watching them in week 13, which was the very final week, or just prior to the end of semester exam. So the consistent viewer, they were watching the majority of their lecture recordings during the semester, so through weeks 1 to 12, and typically they were watching 1 to 4 lectures per week. And there were 25% of the students were in this category. So you can see there's a light purple line that I've drawn on the graph at 3. So that's the number of lectures that were coming out each week. So for the consistent viewer, we were sort of looking at how they were basically hovering around this, and you can see there's no binging at the end. They've kept up with the content and they're not doing that big binge at the end before the exam. So we had about a quarter of the students were doing this kind of behaviour. And then the final group we called the erratic viewer. So for these students, there were periods of 5 or more weeks during the semester where they didn't watch any videos, but then they would have these binge viewing episodes throughout the semester. So this is where they might be looking at 5 or more videos in the week. And we further classified these into the low erratic viewers. So these ones were only watching 12 to 20 of the recordings. And so you can see these little periods of binging, not surprisingly one there during the mid-semester break, and then another one a little bit down towards the end of semester exam. So 9% of students were doing that. And then we had our high group that were watching the majority of the recordings. But again, you can see these periods where they've got these binges, again, coinciding with the mid-semester break, and also some long weekends that were occurring during that time, and then also at the end of semester. So one of the things maybe I could get you guys to discuss just for a minute at your table, and also if you would like to put on Padlet, whether you think there might be other kinds of behaviours that students might be doing that we haven't really captured here. So maybe I could just give you a little bit of time to just chat to the person next to you, even you guys, if you can sort of think about what students might be doing in terms of their viewing behaviour. Please also add these onto the Padlet as well, because that would be great for us to look at.
Oh, that is possible, yeah. I meant 1 week for how I met your mother, 1 week.
Well, this is uni Netflix, right? So.
That is true. They could be binging all the different courses. So
Yeah, because they're doing it across all the courses.
Do you think they're like going across each one and it's just...
Yeah.
if they're a binger, they would be doing that same behavior, would be consistent across.
Yeah. But they just like have focus weeks, so they don't have to think about 4 different subjects in a week.
Yeah.
It's watching 2 subjects in a week.
So what we might be nice to look at 2 courses kind of
Yeah.
side by side. What are they doing?
Yeah.
It might be, oh, this course has got this. And this
Yeah.
has got that.
That
Yeah. Okay, we might continue on. Okay, so when we looked at these different viewing behaviours against academic performance, so you can see along the x-axis there each of the different types, so from non-viewers right through to our consistent viewers, and this time on the y-axis I've got the end of semester exam mark as a percentage. So again, we can see there was a significant difference between the consistent viewers and the non-viewers, which is not surprising. So even though those groups in the middle weren't significantly different, you can see this trend for an increase. But again, we've got some interesting things happening here. So again, here in amongst our non-viewers or our low viewers, there were some that were doing really well. So again, I think these students are probably the ones that were actually in the room and coming along to the face-to-face lectures. But interestingly, in the crammer group, we kind of had these two clusters. So we've got this cluster here, which, yeah, cramming seems to be a good strategy for them. They're doing okay. So they're still doing all right on the end of semester exam. Again, it could be that these students were the ones that were in the face-to-face lectures and then just crammed at the end to sort of not even cram. It was really just to reinforce what they knew. But then we can see that group as well clustered that didn't do well, that tried to cram. And then again, we've got this group of consistent viewers, and so it doesn't seem to be helping in terms of how they've done on the exam. So not sure what's happening with them. So how do we then use that information this year? So we did quite a few things, actually. We changed a lot of things in this course based on this, but some of the main things we did is that we actually amended their assessment structure to closely align with the lecture content and also the pracs as well. And we were really doing this to try and keep the students on track and keep them watching the lectures consistently. So we introduced this Mastering Endo series. So it was a series of low stakes assessment that we had throughout the year that was, the semester that was linked to the lectures and also to the practical classes as well. We also introduced an in-semester exam as well as the end of semester exam. And we asked them an open-ended reflective question at the end of the semester to ask them, was this strategy successful in keeping you on track? And 63% of the students said, yes, it was successful, and 22% said partly successful. And I think mainly because of the introduction of the in-semester exam that helped them. And there's a quote there from one of the students saying, yes, this was successful, and it really did help them to stay on track and up to date. Importantly, it did also seem to improve their exam performance. So we had about 30% failed in 2022 and 23, but only 14% failed in 2024. So that was good to see that improvement. So I guess the takeaways are that detailed Echo 360 analytics can be used to track student engagement across the semester and not just at the end. And it seems like that the influence of both the sort of timing and consistency is just as important as the quantity of what they're watching. Given the face-to-face attendance is generally low, the lecture viewing behaviour is an accurate indicator of student performance. And I think it really highlights that it's important to make students aware of the importance of consistently engaging with lectures, whether that's face-to-face or watching the recordings. And so designing assessments and learning activities to try and assist with reinforcing this behaviour, I think, can be helpful. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. I know you have questions. I'm going to ask you to hold those questions, remember them, because I would like to hand over to Suzanne now, so to ensure that we have enough time for her presentation, and then we'll do some questions at the end. Is that okay? Thank you so much, Lisa. I really feel the crammers in my soul. That was me. But it's so interesting to see how you adjusted the assessments based on that data. So over to you, Suzanne. I will get. Do you want to use this one?
I want to use that one.
Yep.
Sorry. Thank you. Doing a. Oh yeah, I need to click
Up there.
All right. That one. Yep. All right. So maybe I have some insights to what Lisa was just showing you. So my name is Suzanne. I'm in the School of Economics, and I'm here to kind of discuss something that we're playing around with in my school quite frequently. And it's basically coming out of the literature from behavioral psychology and behavioral economics. if we can understand our students' irrational behaviors, we can actually effectively try and preemptively address those to get them more engaged with the content and materials that we provide. So I'm going to give you some insights into the educational research that I've been reviewing in that space, in terms of giving you ideas of what can you do in your class. And then I'm going to talk a bit about some preliminary research that I've done on why our students engage in contract cheating, and what we can learn from that in terms of what we can implement in the classroom. So we want to obviously engage in evidence-based teaching practice. I hope we all are engaging in evidence-based teaching practice, where we're looking at the reliable data, we're collecting information, and we're evaluating it to determine how we can improve student engagement with our teaching materials, with their engagement with the coursework. You're probably familiar with the traditional approaches to evidence-based teaching strategies. This is probably not new to anyone who's here. My real question is, what can we do outside of the activities we do in the classroom? All right. And so what I want to introduce to you guys is this idea of using nudge to address our students' irrational behaviors. So I obviously tell you about what are the irrational behaviors we often observe and what nudge is. So nudge theory is basically changing the choice architecture available to someone to push them directly change their behavior in a way that's going to give them a choice that's actually beneficial for them. All right. So what do I mean by that? Some good examples here are every year, a lot of women will receive a letter that tells them that now's the time to get their cervical cancer screening done, right? So that letter itself is a nudge to engage in a proactive behavior. So you still don't necessarily have to do it, but it's just a gentle reminder that that's an option available to you. Similarly, when you want to pay your taxes, the ATO likes to send you a text message to remind you it's tax time. Maybe you should jump online and fill in your tax forms. So my real question here is, well, how can we integrate these into how we deal with our students' irrational behaviors? And so I think of this as paternalistic nudges, where we're trying to do something that's going to help the student themselves, right? So it's for their own benefit. That's different to a nudge where I'm trying to do something that benefits me, right? So the ATO nudges are obviously a selfish nudge. They're in benefit of the ATO, whereas the cervical cancer screening nudges are more of the paternalistic. It is about improving people's health behavior, their own individual health. So if we understand the types of irrational behaviors our students face, we can think about the types of nudges we can use. Now, the most common one that I see in my students is this process of self-handicapping, right? We call it self-handicapping. It's intentionally avoiding preparation for exams, intentionally avoiding watching those lecture contents, procrastination, and basically talking to diminish your own self in relation to your study habits. And in particular, when we're thinking about self-handicapping, that's exactly what we would have seen in Lisa's line for the students that are cramming at the end. They're pushing it back. They're pushing the activity to the very end so that if they're not successful, they prevent damage to their own self-esteem. All right, so they can come down to this saying, okay, I didn't do well on that exam because I didn't do sufficient study. So they actually negotiate this in their mind. This is what's happening in the background of our students' minds, right? So they're doing this to prevent damage to their self-esteem. It's completely irrational. It's not in their best interest. We want to address this issue of self-handicapping. The other one is hyperbolic discounting. It's the tendency to choose short-term pleasures over long-term benefits. Right, so again, you can think about, are they engaging? Are they coming to class? Are they engaging with materials? When are they doing it? The most painful things we always put to last, right? All of those big assessment items, we might leave them to the end. The short assessment items are very easy for us to complete as a result. So if we understand these two issues, we can think about how we can use nudge in a way to engage our students. So the ways that I've used nudge in my class, and again, these are all in the best interest of getting my students engaged in the course, is to change my default settings. So I run an ed discussion board for my course. And on ed discussion, you can subscribe all the students to receive emails of people posting to the ed discussion board. And by doing that, that means they get the email and then hopefully they will click on that to then see what the discussion is about. Now, I don't necessarily do anything other than change the option available to them. Similarly, I've done some testing with different indicators of performance, in particular around practice quizzes. My students, they don't do practice quizzes. I have practice quizzes for a reason. It's beneficial for them to complete it. I have a 40% completion rate. So what I've done is I've sent them an email encouraging them to do the practice quiz, but I've tied that to past performance of students, okay? Out of the people who've completed the practice quiz, how many of them received a grade 6 or 7 in that email to kind of tell them it's not just in your best interest, but this is why it's in your best interest to try and encourage them to then go and complete this practice quiz. The other thing that I'm going to use next one is going to personalize those emails. So I'm actually, rather than saying dear student, we'll say, dear person's name, have you thought about doing this? Here's the percentages associated with it. So there's research around using that personal tone in these emails being actually really critical to engaging them with these small signals. So this is the kind of thing that you can actively do, small nudges to get your students to engage in positive behaviors in your classroom, right? So thinking about the same things, I've been thinking a lot about why students engage in cheating, or what I call basically dishonest behavior. All right. So literature is basically telling us that students clearly, they face pressure from high stakes exams. They're more likely to cheat in those situations. And if they don't think they're going to get caught, they're more likely to engage in cheating. So what I did was a lab experiment. So a lab experiment where students make choices at a computer, not what the traditional scientists do for their experiments, just to make that clear. So I give them an option to complete a task, and we determine 20% of them engage in cheating behaviors. And we've then tried to measure, based on the different frameworks that we've used, why are they actually engaging in that cheating behavior? Well, when we increase the time pressure, that increased the proportion of cheating. If they were less competent at completing the task, they were more likely to cheat as well. If they did historically worse, they cheated more often. So basically, you can think about your assessment. If a student is a low performer, they're more likely to engage in these behaviors. And if they think that there's no consequences, they're clearly going to continue to cheat. So keeping in mind the lab experiment is to take away all of those outside influences and just think specifically about when students choose to engage in this activity. So this, we found this 20% of cheating. So you can think about, okay, 20% of my students are likely engaging in academic dishonesty, right? So what can I do? Well, think about your low stakes, frequent assessments, right? Things that it's not worth getting someone else to complete for you, right? Avoid those all or nothing situations, those big exams, those big assessment items. Think about how you can segment it out, right? Scaffold, integrate assessment within the labs, within the activities they're doing within the class, so they have to show consistent progress over time, all right? So the other thing that I found in this particular research is that if students had good knowledge of what is actually considered academic dishonesty, they were less likely to engage in cheating. Now, we always tell them, this is a dishonest behavior, but I think what we could do better here is talk about it more with our students every semester. Okay, this is what academic integrity is. There are consequences. You need to consider those consequences. What would we view as dishonesty? What would we view as an academic integrity issue? So that's kind of like my speed run, because I figured I'd go fast so we have more time for questions. But this is more like just insights from behavioral economics that we've been applying in our classroom. We don't have as much solid data as the others, but you can kind of see that that links quite nicely to the previous presentations. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. And I might ask Lisa as well to stand up at the front.
Yeah.
Put you both on the hot seat. Any questions for, oh, the hands are up. Can I go back to my colleague Tanya? She hasn't had an opportunity to ask a question yet.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I am looking at chat and there are two questions. The first question is for Lisa. And Selena says, it's an interesting analysis. I wonder if there would be a way to analyse what time and day the students are accessing the records.
I think we can see that. I think the time is shown, but I can't get access to that immediately. Apparently, there's all sorts of information that we can get in terms of even what sort of device they're watching it on, all of those sort of things. But I haven't looked at that yet, but I think that would be really interesting to look at too, because I think often they're watching these lectures quite late at night as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. And our next comment on chat is not a question, but it is a comment. And Adani notes that it's wonderful to see the subtle literature actually linking to some of these behaviours that you have mentioned throughout your research. And as an ADHer, that the person does relate to how they did behave in those behaviours as a student and also still as a worker. They can still behave in those less than ideal behaviours, but they are certainly looking at those. And those nudges, especially regular communications, really do help neurodivergent people. So thank you so much for doing that and taking the initiative in that area.
Oh, great. Thank you to those online. Back to the room. I've got a question over here. Sorry.
Thanks, everyone. They were really, really interesting talks. Lisa, so I'm not sure if you have talked to students, but even just anecdotally, I'm just wondering if you've had a chance in your dealings throughout the semester to chat to students about those behaviours. Obviously, you know, you've got this dichotomy of students who do poorly but have viewed a lot of lectures, and then students who do really well but have hardly viewed any lectures. And so I'm curious about the student, if you know anything about the student perspective around their own behaviours and motivations for what they're doing, or what their strategies are for succeeding despite not viewing a lot of lectures.
Yeah, and I think that's key and something that we could really go into a lot more. So I have talked with a lot of students after this course, more in the capstone course, sort of reflecting back. Mainly the students that I talk to are the ones that are the engaged ones that, and I do ask them, you know, you did really well in my course. How did you go to the lectures? And quite a lot of these will say, yes, I went to the lecture, or I did view all the lectures online. So it's really those ones that aren't doing well that I don't really know what they're doing. So it would be good to try and get some information, maybe do some interviews with some of them if they're willing to talk to me about those, you know, what they're actually doing. Because of course, with this viewing data, we don't really know, sure, they might have viewed it, but did they actually engage and take in the information? So that's one of the limitations, I guess, with this. But I think by using this sort of data rather than them self-reporting what they're doing, we're kind of seeing more realistically about what they're actually doing. Yeah.
Great. I go back here. Oh, no.
I really like that you've kept that up. This frequent assessment is something we're trying to do, but it feels a little bit like the university's working against us, because they go, well, you can't have more than 4 assessment items. They should leave it to the academics to do that. So do you have any feel that and from anyone in the room, I guess, is there any sort of feel that we'll get a little bit more academic freedom to test appropriately so we'll get the students to engage?
So it's a very good question, because I've seen exactly that pushback, and particularly in our school, this push to let's go back to exams as our main assessment item. And that's valid for certain courses at a certain point in a student's degree. But I think as we're moving along for the student learning experience, as they go from, you know, level 1 to level 2 to level 3, when we in level 2 and level 3, that's where we probably would benefit from more of these low stake assessments to engage the students more holistically in their learning. That being said, I still do that, and I've got I'm not sure if I should say, you can get exceptions to that rule for low stake assessments. So sometimes the conversation needs to happen around why those low stake assessments exist. So for example, in one of my courses, I use a tutorial submission. They just have to submit their tutorial activity whenever within that week, and they can get a small number of points for doing that. And that way I'm trying to engage them in the content in continual assessment. And they're never going to cheat in that instance because it's like 1.25 marks, right? But I think we should be doing more of these low stake. And low stake, I mean, is 10% or below in my perspective of that. But I think we should be doing more.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Oh, Margaret hasn't asked. I'm gonna.
Hello. Lisa, you showed the usage data from 2023, and then in 2024, you changed your strategies. Do you have the usage data for 2024?
Yes, I have, but I haven't analysed it yet. But I'm very interested to have a look at that as well. I was hoping I'd have it all done for this talk, and I've got a poster I'm doing at a conference next week, but it's not going to be quite ready. But it'll be very interesting to see if putting in the in-semester exam just meant that they had 2 binge sessions, one before the mid-semester and one at the end. So I'm sure there'll be a few doing that. But yes, I'm very keen to see if we've got a few more of those more consistent students. So if we can get that up above a quarter of the students to even half of them doing it a little bit more consistently, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From some previous work that we've done in physics with introductory level students, when we had weekly assessment and a mid-semester test, we could see spikes before every single piece of assessment.
Yeah.
And the weekly assessment was a small stakes thing.
Yeah.
So it does look like it's driving behaviour.
We ended up with almost an assessment, I think almost every couple of weeks. So even if they had spikes, it's only going to be over a couple of weeks. So that the spike might be 5 or 6 lectures. They really couldn't get away with doing bigger spikes than that because, well, they could, I guess, and just not do the assessment. So a lot of these assessments were only worth, 5% or, definitely below 10%. So we did have some students that just didn't complete them. So I do have lots more data to look at for this year, but that's on the to-do list.
It'd be great to see that comparison in the behaviour.
Yeah, watch this space. Hopefully I can present it next year.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Join me one more time in thanking our presenters. We have Brian, Lisa, and Suzanne. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming today. We can keep the conversation going in the Padlet. So please feel free to jump in the Padlet, ask some questions, and I'll ask the presenters to continue to answer the questions in there. Thank you so much, everybody.